Good afternoon. Time is now 3:30. I'll call to order the City of Norwood Planning Commission for December 4th, 2024. Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Present.
Mayor Schneider, Mrs. Sickinger, Mr. Hockney,
Present.
Mr. Sewer.
Present.
Moving on to item B, approval of the agenda. I'll move that the December 4th, move that the December 4th, 2024 agenda of the Norwood Planning Commission be approved as prepared. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes?
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer,
Yes.
Moving on to item C, approval of the minutes of November 6th. I'll move that the November 6th, 2024 Planning Commission minutes be approved as prepared.
Second.
Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes?
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to item D, public hearing. Jonathan D. Woker with McBride Dale Clarion, representing Uptown Rental Properties, is requesting a waiver from the planned unit development requirements for the property at 3732 Montgomery Road, located within a general business district zoning district with a planned unit development overlay. If you would please
To
state.
the chair, yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to just introduce myself and then Mr. Woker.
Please.
Okay. Patrice Burke with Uptown Rental Properties. Do you want me to spell it, or you have it? Okay. So, good afternoon. Thank you for having us. My name is Patrice Burke with Uptown Rental Properties, and before Mr. Woker presented the details of the relief that we're seeking, I just wanted to introduce myself to the commission and say that we are very excited to be working in Norwood, and that we've had a really great experience over the past year engaging with city staff, with the mayor, with Mr. Powers, Mr. Skelly, Mr. Wolf, as well as some neighbors and stakeholders. So we had a meeting, a public meeting a couple weeks ago, probably about a month ago now, to introduce the project to the neighbors, knowing that they would be getting this notice, and we wanted to let them know kind of what our plans were for the site and also get their feedback. So this is just a continuation of that process. Uptown Rental Properties, one thing that I really want you to know about us is that we are a local owner, developer, manager. We've been working in the city of Cincinnati and Norwood for over 30 years, and we are a long-term holder, very committed to our properties and being a good neighbor. So we really look forward to working in Norwood, and thank you for your time today. I'm here for questions as well.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Woker, W-O-C-H-E-R. My address is McBride Dale Clarion, 5721 Suite 300, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45227. Thank you for your time today. We are here requesting a waiver to the PUD overlay for this property. I submitted an application and a description letter, as well as these plans that I'm going to present today. The property's at 3732 Montgomery Road. This is the southeast corner of Montgomery Road and Lexington Avenue. This is a site plan of the location. Uptown Properties has a contract to purchase the property that's 3.9 acres. And the proposal is to build two 4-story multifamily apartment buildings on this property. So there would be a total of 205 dwelling units, approximately 190,000 square feet. And so this, again, is the plan. You can see that the buildings would be located along Montgomery Avenue, Montgomery Road, and then we would have frontage on Wasson Way, the new trail that's being developed and is underway there. And then we would have parking access to the buildings from Lexington Avenue. So we would have two driveways, and the buildings, again, in two locations. One would have frontage on Montgomery Road, and then the second building would be more to the east there. So, yeah, the property is currently zoned GBD, General Business District, with a PUD overlay. And our understanding is that in about 2014, the city adopted an ordinance that applied the PUD overlay, and that the intent of that PUD overlay was to basically put controls and restrictions on certain types of uses that could develop on that property. And so in 2014, there was concerns about what might happen, and so the city put in place an overlay that would restrict the use of the property for various automotive-related uses, so for automotive service and repair, for vehicle sales, for vehicle rental, also restrictions for processing or packaging-related industries. And so that was the primary objective of that PUD, and also to control the locations of parking, so that one of the provisions was not to have parking adjacent to Montgomery Road. We're here asking the city to approve a waiver which is permitted by section 1155.12 of the city zoning ordinance, and waive the PUD overlay, which then would allow us to develop under the underlying zoning, the general business district zoning, which would permit this use, and that would be the primary controls of the development. There's certain standards that are in your zoning code related to waivers of this overlay. I've submitted a written response to each of those criteria. I can go over those, but I do think you have those in your packet. As I said, the building orientation is towards Montgomery Road. It's a long, narrow property. We think we've taken good advantage of the site layout. You have a couple of the building renderings that are prepared for this site. You can see that it's multi-story. We've got different views from the intersection. I'm going to change this view as well. This shows a view from the Wasson Way Trail. We think that this is going to be an attractive redevelopment for this property that's been vacant for a long time and is underutilized. We also think that it's going to complement the investments that have been made in the Wasson Way Trail and provide opportunities for future Norwood residents to take advantage of that amenity. The project will also be an appropriate transitional land use. So one of our neighbors is the Stone Bowling Alley, and then there's some residents on Lexington as well. We think that this development will be a good transitional land use between what's existing in the neighborhood. And we also think that this is going to catalyze development along the Montgomery Road corridor, consistent with some plans that the city has adopted, and take advantage of the activities happening in and around Xavier University. So that's where we are. Again, we're asking for the waiver of the PUD, and then we would go through the permit process with staff under the general business zoning. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them, and we request your approval.
Questions from the commissioners?
Not so much for this gentleman, but for you, Noah. Does the waiver stay with this development or with the property? I couldn't find it in our planning code.
Well, we can place conditions on the waiver.
Okay, so in
that
other
would
words,
address that.
let's just say something happens. They decide not to develop this. I'd like to not have the waiver in place. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
It does.
Okay. That's just a clarification I had.
Understood.
And we're comfortable with that as well. I mean, this is the plan we intend to submit. We're working on plans now and hope to file with the city for permits in January. But I certainly understand the condition that's discussed.
Any other questions?
We're here for questions or answers if you have them.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone who would like to speak in favor of the development and the waiver of the planned unit development? Anyone who would like to speak in favor? Anyone who would like to speak in favor?
I have questions, but are you asking the public here or just?
Anyone in the room,
I have questions, I don't
But-
necessarily.
please come to the microphone. So typically, we offer an opportunity for those to speak in favor of it, and then those who would like to speak opposed.
Okay. And I'm not either favor or opposed, I just have questions, because I don't know enough to be one way or the other. So, do you need my name and address and all that good stuff? It's Mary Speed, just like speed limit, S-P-E-E-D, 2000 Lexington Avenue. But just trying to understand what giving the waiver means. Does that mean that they're exempt from any of the normal processes that this group would normally have to approve? You know, things I worry about is the amount of parking, the aesthetics, those kinds of things. So if they get that waiver, is there anything there that makes them bypass coming to this group to get those kinds of things approved?
So what they're asking for, there are kind of two pieces on this parcel. There is the general zoning, which is what you would kind of think of as like a regular zone, and what that is here is the general business district. So that's the same zone that you'll see in a lot of different places as you go up and down Montgomery Road. On top of that, we've placed what's called a planned unit development overlay.
Okay.
The planned unit development overlay is like what you've seen over at Factory 52, or may have seen, where the developer has to come in, they do plans for the buildings, they do a lot of very technical planning upfront. Planning Commission approves that or does not approve that, and then they build in accordance with that. So what they're asking to do is be able to be allowed to build by right under the regular zoning code that is in place, that general business district.
So,
Which-
for example, Factory 52 would have had to have come in here with all those details for you guys to approve before they could do anything,
That's correct.
where the general business thing gives them more leeway without getting this group's approval necessarily.
Building under the general business district, I don't know that I would necessarily say that it gives more leeway, but it does not require approval of the planning commission if we waive it.
Okay.
Coming in under a planned unit development allows you to ask for things that are not allowed under the regular zoning,
Okay.
in addition to being able to do things that are allowed under the regular zoning. They're essentially different sets of requirements.
So what are some of the things that you would be allowed to ask about with a planned unit that you can't ask about with the general business, like or require or have to approve?
There are a lot of things that it would include specifics about parking, about open space, about building heights, building setbacks. A lot of those things are contained in the general
Are
zoning
not
code.
contained?
They are contained, so
Okay.
each zone has specific setbacks and things like that.
Okay.
Planned unit developments allow you to waive some of those sort of things. It's a fairly thick section of our code, and I'm not gonna try to do it all off
No,
my
but I'm just
memory,
like,
but
for example,
just to give you an idea.
landscaping.
Landscaping is included as part of a planned unit development.
So if they don't have to do the planned unit development, they don't have to get that approved by you?
That's correct.
Okay. And parking, if they don't do a planned unit development, they don't have to bring that through here to make sure there's enough parking?
There are parking requirements contained in the code for each zoning,
Okay.
each kind of zoning category.
How about the aesthetics of the building in terms of being congruent with a neighborhood type of setting? If they don't have a PUD, do they don't have to to make sure that the actuals, you know, what actually it ends up being like?
They would still have to comply with all the aesthetic requirements that are contained in our code when it comes to building heights, materials and that sort of thing. They don't have to get those specific approvals from this body.
But if you kept the PUD in place, they would have to get that from you, correct?
Yeah, in order to proceed under the planned unit development, planning commission would have to approve it, and that would then go to city council, who would have to approve it again.
So what's the advantage of not having things come through you? I'm trying to understand the waiver. Why, you know, if you've got a process in place, why is a waiver needed?
I'll let them speak to that, because that's sort of asking what their state of mind is why they want that.
Yeah,
Is it
yeah.
okay if I,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
again,
go
Jonathan Woker. So, two things. We would still have to meet your building design standards. So you have a section in your code that specifies building materials and articulation of the building and so on, which are deferred to in your PUD. So if we were in the PUD or not in the PUD, the same standards would be used. The only difference is, you know, Mr. Wolf would be evaluating them under the general business versus the planning commission. The main reason that we're asking for the waiver is because the city's code requires conveyance of open space to the city. And for the project of this size, it's just not practical. We would have to dedicate 1 acre of the property to the city as open space. So we are still going to have to provide landscaping, we're still going to have to meet your parking requirements, show your building designs, but the creation of, the conveyance of 1/4 of our property to the city is not practical for our development, and that's really what's driving this waiver.
Why does the city want the acre? Or want the room?
If you please come back toward the microphone to make sure we can hear you on the video.
Yeah, why does the city require to have the room? I'm just trying to understand, circumventing or not using a process that's in place, what's the benefit to the city? Since the building's gonna be there for decades. So what's the benefit to the city of not going through the process? Or what is it? I'm just trying to understand the difference. I'm very much in forward of there being a development there, because I think it's better than an empty lot. So I'm very in forward of the development. I just want to make sure if it's going to be something we're going to have for decades, that it's been reviewed, it goes through whatever we need to go through to get the best aesthetic, the best parking solution, the landscaping, all those kinds of things. And whatever solution is the best for that is what I want.
Certainly.
So that's why I'm asking the question. So why do we typically ask for the 1/4 of the property as open space?
So the open space requirement is kind of, it's built into our code regarding planned unit developments. And it's essentially to make sure that there are, for larger developments, ample open space for the public to utilize. So that's why you see a lot of that, like the green that you see at Factory 52. Now, this is a much smaller development, and that's why they're saying that this is impractical for that purpose.
Okay. I guess I can understand that. Yeah.
Patrice Burke. So there's still a very robust process in place. So this process with the Planning Commission would hear the plan unit development, any relief to the plan unit development, correct? If we have any relief to the underlying zoning, which is general business district, that also has a process with the zoning board of appeals. Is that correct?
If there are any pieces that do not meet the
Right.
code, that's correct.
So there's a robust, it's not that you're circumventing a process, we're asking that that layer that overlays it is not the process, it's the one that is underlying it, is the process.
So I had the same thing as Mr. Sewer, am I Sewer?
Sewer.
Sewer. I had the same thing as I want to be sure that if you decide this is what should be done, that it cannot be passed, it's only for this particular use, it cannot be passed on if this doesn't happen.
Yes.
That's a huge thing. And then, as you said, the amount of this code is extremely thick. So, if there is something in keeping the overlay there that better ensures the aesthetics for years and years to come, whether that's landscaping, parking, anything else, because I don't know what's in that thick list. But if you guys, knowing it, think there's a reason the planning commission should still be involved because you believe you can have better control of that than if you took a waiver, then I would ask you to keep it. If you think the underlying code will take care of that, then, support that too, because I do support having a development. I just want to make sure, this is going to be around a long time, that in, the interest of saving some time in this process right now, we don't end up with a less than optimal solution.
All right.
So I think that's the end of my feedback.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Skelly?
If I could be sworn in.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So it may be a bit out of character, but I thought at least, just in case I don't get to speak, just to provide some background and also allow for anyone in the audience or for you guys to cross-examine. So everything you heard initially from the presentation from Ms. Burke is accurate. There was discussion with myself, Ralph, emails exchanged. I did attend the open house back and forth. I do not have any objections to the design, what you see. There might be some minor things I could, talk about, but to me, for the request that's in front of us right now, I definitely support the request. I do so based on 3 pillars. And essentially, the first one, and the reason we're here, is at least my interpretation of section 1155.02, and maybe it's colored more from whatever, 40 years of interpreting these in other jurisdictions, is that I think it's typically left at the discretion of the property owner whether they want to proceed or not proceed, and how it best suits their needs, and then the reciprocal, how it does the city benefit. Since we just had the member for the public talk about what does the city gain, what does the city lose, again, there's really less of a discussion about that. It's more that if a developer decides to use the planned unit development approach, it provides some flexibility, but then it also requires, and you heard the developer providing for additional open space. Now, in this case, I think with earlier discussions that we had, there may be some necessary variances that would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and I believe there's 5, but from what I heard initially on, they weren't substantive in nature, and it's something that the board would definitely look at and entertain. So again, recapping, the first pillar of my supporting, at least my interpretation of the section ordinance, would provide that discretion to the property owner. The second item is that kind of looking at kind of some of the seminal articles prepared by land use attorneys going back to 1965 when our Federal Housing Administration was dealing with these creations. Those articles are all supportive in terms of how, at least I would interpret this, again, providing for the flexibility, providing for an alternative to cookie cutter lot by lot development. So again, that was the second item. And again, I'd love to go on because it's like, it was a good re-education going back to my college experience. And then last, I would say probably the most compelling, and this was based on a manual that I picked up from the law department. It's somewhat dated, but there are references, and it specifically, I'll provide these and enter these as exhibits or evidence to it, talk about, again, at the discretion of the owner. So while the statutes concerning cities aren't embedded in the ORC, for the first one, for section 519.021, planned unit developments, and I'll just read the first sentence. So a township zoning resolution or amendment adopted in accordance with this chapter may establish or modify planned unit developments. Planned unit developments regulation shall apply to property only at the election of the property owner and shall include standards, and it goes on. And then that identical wording, and you would just substitute a county zoning resolution, repeats the same thing, only at the election of the property owner. And there's other references to talking about where you can kind of glean at the third paragraph. In this case, I'll just read from the county board. Gets down to the point where it says property owners who wish to have planned unit development regulations apply to the property, and then it goes on. So to me, the way I read the language, it's more permissive as opposed to mandatory. So give this to the stenographer, you're welcome to take a look at it. And I said also, it was based on the guidance that I used from this. So that's basically it. So I think getting back to the concerns for the public, and again, I should have established, so my name is Mike Skelly, I'm the Chief Development Director for the city, but putting aside the work that's gone into assisting the developer, providing some guidance, at least my interpretation of how the PUD provisions apply, it's something that it's almost an exchange of both ideas and either benefits or disadvantages to both parties. But typically, it's supposed to work at the developer's need. They have to give up something, and what they give up is essentially land they will still have to adhere to the existing general business district zones. And if they can't, they are entitled to the same relief as any other property owner, residential, yourself, or a large developer, that if they can't satisfy certain requirements, they would have to go to the BZA for relief. And then that would trigger the BZA to make either an approval with conditions, or deny it.
Thank you, Mr. Skelly. Anyone who would like to speak in favor of the waiver of the PUD? Anyone who would like to speak in favor? Offer an opportunity for anyone who would like to speak opposed. Anyone who would like to speak opposed? Anyone who would like to speak opposed? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Offer an opportunity for the commissioners to discuss. Before we do that, I'll ask Mr. Wolf if he has any comments.
Yes, I do. I don't want to get too lengthy, but Jonathan Walker explained what my findings were, basically in general. The biggest thing is the site's long and narrow, and is on a corner lot bordered by Montgomery Road, Lexington Avenue, and Watson Way. So they're handcuffed in space. And my recommendations, in a way, and they're very light, this project would be a good addition to Norwood. If the planning commission does set aside the PUD for this project only, and that should take, as long as you say it's for this project only, it'll stay on the board, on the zoning map with the PUD. The applicant must apply, let's see what I have, must apply to the BZA for, at least that I know of, 4 known major issues. Not knowing how the BZA will react to those, but they would still have to appeal those to the BZA. If the planning commission does not decide to set aside the PUD, they will need to make accommodations within the PUD for the applicant, and the major accommodation to remove the open space for the PUD criteria. So, which you have the option to do. Regardless of the way this board votes, the staff at this point does not have any definitive recommendations to the planning commission, but the building department staff can and will work with the applicant on both scenarios.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Discussion with the commissioners?
Ralph, your second comment there, I think, answers the question that the young lady asked about, does this give them the right to waive process under a GB? And you're saying absolutely not.
No.
And you only know of 4, there could be
does
more,
not.
and it's.
It does not, because if you go with a PUD and you still don't meet the criteria, you still have to go to the BZA. Or go in front of this board to ask for their mea culpas, basically. And either way, it's gonna have to be adjudicated. And it's a quicker process through the BZA than it is through this board, because you go to this board, then you go one step further if it's approved, and so on.
Ralph, would you say too, though, with it being a single project, I mean, it's apartments, it makes it an easier job to go through the process as a GBD versus when you have a very complex, and I'll use Factory 52, but
Right.
that's just, there's just a lot of different entities, a lot of different uses, and it becomes very complex.
Factory 52 is a very complex project because you had existing buildings, you had new buildings, they wanted to go a little bit taller than what was required, and they had to come before you and the commissioners to make determinations.
So we do plan reviews for GBDs all the time.
Right.
Very specific standards, and so they probably have already reviewed them. They know the 4 and probably any others, and they're gonna have to come in front of BZA and.
Correct. They have to come before the BZA. They'll come to me first. We'll have conversations.
Zoning approval, I use
Right.
the word BZA.
We will look at it, review it with them, make sure that our concerns are met prior to them coming to the BZA. And depending on how we react, will determine their reactions. And it's a quicker process. And it'll allow them to get started a little bit better, a little bit easier. Right now, they're showing the bottom as a retail space. I don't know if it's gonna stay retail, may become office space, but that's where it is. And it's gonna be green on the Montgomery side. So it's gonna give a little bit of greenery as you're coming down Montgomery. It's not gonna be right on Montgomery Road.
I'll say for my part, I've been involved in a number of discussions about this development. I think this is a good development on a difficult spot. It's long, it's narrow, it's hemmed in, as Mr. Wolf indicated. I am in favor of doing this with a certain number of parameters placed on top of that, and I'll touch on those here. So I would be willing to waive the PUD, subject to 4 conditions. One is that the waiver is provided to Uptown Rental Properties as the owner of the property. So another owner, if they would sell the property, would have to come in and make this request again. The waiver would be subject to the underlying zoning, and any variances required to complete the project are subject to the approval of the Norwood Board of Zoning Appeals. I would restrict the waiver to the site plan shown on page 4 of the packet provided by Uptown Rental Properties dated 11/6/2024, except that the Norwood Building Commissioner, Mr. Wolf, would be empowered to authorize minor changes, and the waiver would be limited in time, and the proposed project must begin no later than calendar year 2025 and be completed no later than calendar year 2028.
Is that a motion, sir?
No, it's not. Just a discussion point at this point.
Good.
Although it may turn into a motion. Do any of those conditions cause concerns?
Just the first one, just clarifying that it could be Uptown Rental Properties or a related entity. Because it's very unlikely that Uptown Rental Properties will be applying for the permit.
Understood.
I do have a question.
Yes.
This is not anything to do with your proposal, more towards Uptown. Did I understand you say you have a tendency to own and manage your properties? You're in it for the long term?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. We've owned some properties for over 30 years. Our strategy is to hold our properties for a very long time, and we self-manage everything that we own.
That's, and I asked the question because I think that's also very important to the question about how long is it going to be there? Well, you have vested interest to make sure it's kept up for that reason. So I think that makes me feel good too about approving something like this. Okay.
Any further discussion, questions, comments? Okay, well, I will make a motion, which I've written down and I can give to you later, Mrs. Town.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I move that we approve the request for a waiver for the planned unit development requirements, subject to the following 4 conditions. The waiver is provided to Uptown Rental Properties or a related entity as owner of the property. The waiver is subject to the underlying zoning, and any variances required to complete the project are subject to approval by the Norwood Board of Zoning Appeals. Waiver is restricted to the site plan shown on page 4 of the packet provided by Uptown Rental Property dated 11/06/2024, except that the Norwood Building Commissioner is empowered to authorize minor changes, and waiver is limited in time, and the proposed project must begin construction during calendar year 2025 and be completed no later than calendar year 2028. I have a second for my very long motion.
I'll second.
Mrs. Town, would you please call the roll?
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you. Moving on to item E, new business, none stated. Is there any from either of the commissioners?
Oh, no, I'm going to talk to Tim about that.
Okay. Hearing no new business, moving on to item F, old business. There is none. Move on to item G. I'll make a motion to excuse Mayor Schneider and Mrs. Sickinger,
Seconded.
Oh,
seconded by Mr. Hockney. Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes?
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
yes.
Moving on to item H, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Town, please call the roll.
Chairman Powers,
Yes.
Mr. Hockney,
Yes.
Mr. Sewer.
Yes.
We are adjourned at 4:06.